Hey there, class. This video is on getting started with Jupyter Notebooks. Now, Jupyter Notebooks is a fairly well-used property, one of the components of Anaconda Navigator, and it's very popular in the development community. And I'm going to use this course to introduce it to you if you haven't already used it, and really get used to it, because when you go to your first internship, you will be using it guaranteed. Now I'm going to go ahead and presume that you've already followed the instructions and you've gone to anaconda.org and then downloaded it for your platform. Now here's what you will see when you launch it. We get a very lightweight panel display of the various Anaconda assets, plenty of them to choose from here, including PyCharm. There's a link to that. It's not going to open up a separate instance, but it'll open up your instance. But then the one that we'll be dealing with in this course here is going to be the Jupyter Notebook. So when you click launch, this is going to launch the sort of the mini app for the Jupyter Notebooks. There's the command prompts all going, and these are always displayed in a browser. It's not going to be a separate application window, but just simply in a browser. So you saw there the Jupyter Notebook starting up, and this is it. It's just simply a very lightweight application running in a browser. It immediately goes to your file system. So here's the file system that we have, or that I have at least, I should say. And then what I recommend that you do is, in your computer's file system, go ahead and create a CompSci 240 folder, and that's going to be then just a very neatly locatable place to store your code. Now, once you're in a safe location, definitely remember the location. There'll be times when we will have to pull a data file from the learning management system, from Canvas, and then download it and make sure to place it in this folder so that our notebook can go and access it. Now, getting started is going to be quite easy. If you just start over here with new and select this option right here, that'll create a Python 3 notebook. And again, that opens up into a brand new tab of your browser. And here is here's the Jupyter Notebook. Now, all it is just like if you're running command line Python instructions, this is the exact same thing. It lets you do a complete program, but broken up into segments, and it lets you experiment with just those segments. And the advantage is, well, you can just change this little thing here or this little thing here and run it and see if it works, or try this particular instruction that you're learning and wrestling with, and it'll just really isolate that part of the code rather than having to run an entire script and then out of all of that output try and parse which output line is the one that you're currently working on. So this is just a real nice system. Now it does require that the cells be run in order. So for example, if you have some variables declared further up in your notebook, and then later you refer to them further on down, well, you need to make sure to have run those cells, actually executed them, so that they stay resident in memory, and that so you can access them with later cells. Now, each of these cells is exactly that. It's called a cell. There's a couple of different kinds. There's a code cell, in which we can put Python code. And then there's also a markdown cell. And I'll change the type of this one here to a markdown. And what this does is it's just a text cell. It's going to let us put text in there that stays permanent in the notebook. And of course, we can change it. So here's an example of just some text that we can put in there, Untitled Lab. To change it, just double click the cell. There is some formatting that we'll get into. We can actually precede this with a couple of pound signs, and it then creates a little more of a bold title. And depending on the number of pound signs you put in, the size of that title grows and shrinks. Now, to to simply run a cell, you just type your code in there and run it. It couldn't be that simpler. Let's say A equals 5, B equals 6, and we want to run A plus B. So there, I ran it, and you can see that the output is 11. Pretty clever. To run it, you can do a couple of things. One is to press the run button. The other is you can go to cell and then select run cells, run all of them selectively, just the ones above you or just the ones below, or just run them all. Now, I mentioned that, that you have to run these in order if you do reference them in a subsequent cell. So for example, in this current cell, we will see that we do have access to the variables A and B, because here I'll go now A minus B, and it gives us a -1 output. And it does that only because we had run the previous cells. I'm going to do a C here, C equals 20. And then I'm not going to run it, but I'm going to create another cell below it to just simply print C. And you can see that we get an error there because C is not defined. And that's because we did not run this cell right here that established the variable C and then assigned the integer literal 20 to it. And now if we were to run this again, the error drops out and we simply get the output of 20. Now, Jupyter Notebook will let you print out objects by just simply calling them. And you won't necessarily have to use a print statement, but you certainly could. You could easily do a print C, and it'll print the exact same thing. So there's some extra versatility in there. Your print statements will really sort of be optional for just the native types of objects. If you get something more complex, like later in the class, we'll get into some pandas data frames, and there, we'll see how to print more complex objects like that. So the way to know that your cell actually ran is if this number over here in 1, and this means in cell 1, if that number actually creates an integer, well, then you know it successfully ran. Let me run it again. There's a shortcut for running cells also, Shift-Enter. And if you saw that, there was briefly an asterisk in there, and then it went to 7. And the asterisk means, okay, I'm currently thinking, I'm processing, and then when that cell has successfully run, you'll get an integer in there. And that integer is going to be a sequential integer of what cell has just been run. If we ran this one next, we would get an 8, because that's the 8th thing that we've run so far in this notebook. You can also go to the top here and select Run All, and it'll just run them all in order 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and so on. Now, this notebook, if you want to change the title, you just click on it and you can put in whatever kind of title that you want. And if you go back into the main Jupyter Notebook repository, you'll see that that file is now resident here. You get a message that this notebook is actually running in memory. And you'll want to pay attention to that and make sure you don't have a lot of things running that you're not using. And then look at the extension for this. It's an IPYNB. And that stands for an integrated Python notebook. And you'll frequently hear these called either a Jupyter notebook or often just simply a Python notebook. The Jupyter stack is so common and prevalent out in the landscape that its name has kind of resolved to just Python notebook. And you might hear something like, hey, just send me a Python notebook on that. And this is exactly what they're talking about. Now, to stop to stop a notebook, you don't want to just X out and close the tab. If you do that, you'll see here, I'm going to refresh the Jupyter notebook. You'll see here that this notebook is actually still running even though the tab is closed. So we have to do something else. And the something else that we have to do is just over here in the File menu. We'll just pick Close and Halt. And that will do two things. It'll shut down the Jupyter notebook, and then it'll close that current tab. So that's a quick getting started primer on the Jupyter notebooks. Make sure that you've got this up and running, because we'll be using these really each week for the rest of the semester. And I'll be featuring notebooks in many of my demos. You'll have some hands-on labs, you'll have some graded labs, and these will all be based on the Jupyter Notebook. Okay, good luck, everybody. And as always, pop a question into the discussion board or simply message me if you're having some trouble. Thanks.